Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of August 14th. I'm still Michael James. I'm up here in Rogers Park, a very blue 49th Ward, and we're happy to be here. We love this Zoom because it lets us go all around the world, all around the country. And today we're going up to Michigan to talk to our old pal, Paul Draus, Professor Draus at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. And once upon a time, he was a co-producer and a co-host of this show. And that's how we got to know each other. He was doing graduate work at Loyola, and he got involved with the show, and we've been in touch ever since. Paul, we're always glad to know what you've done, what you've seen, what you're learning, what you're thinking. And there's a lot to talk about up in Michigan and in your life. So how about we start off with a little bit on Abdul El-Sayed's very close-fought primary and the prospects for his election ahead.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, great to see you, Michael. I'm here on Woodward Avenue. That's Woodward Avenue behind me here at the University of Michigan Detroit Center. And see, that's the Detroit
nice
sign right there. And
I've got my high school track and field.
Nice. So, yeah, I mean, I was out of town for the election, the primary election last week, but I did vote early. So, Abdul El-Sayed.
And we suggest that everyone try to vote early and get your mail-in ballots in early. Go and ask for them, get them in real early.
I mean, I'm lucky that Michigan is pretty good about this. Dearborn is really good about it. So it was very easy to go vote early. And so I did, and I was watching the results from a few states away. And it was a closer primary, I think, than people expected. Abdul was, I think, running 10 points ahead in the polls and ended up being very, very close primary election. Now, I mean, the other candidate was also somebody that I've met. I mean, I know Abdul a little bit. I met him back when he was the director of the health department here in the city of Detroit, probably almost 10 years ago, or maybe more than 10 years ago. And Haley Stevens, came to an event, a community event that I was involved with this year. And so did Abdul. He came to one earlier this year that I invited him to. So, I had a chance to meet them both. It ended up being closer than people thought, I think, because, this was what was interesting about the election results was that, first of all, I mean, I think the positive thing is the media is focusing a lot on sort of the progressive versus establishment battle here. But I think the really exciting thing is that turnout is way, way up. So overall turnout here for the Democratic primary was like 1.5 million, and it was like 1 million for the Republican primary. So just kind of the enthusiasm metric is important. But Haley Stevens got most of her votes. She won, the urban counties. She won Wayne County, where Detroit is. She won Oakland County. I think she won Macomb County. Although I think Abdul may have come close in Macomb County. And Abdul actually won in like Grand Rapids, which is known as being a more conservative, county, and in a lot of the sort of outlying rural areas, as well as kind of university towns and things like that. So in Detroit, I mean, Haley Stevens was doing the retail politics of going to a lot of the black churches. And so she got a lot of support from black voters, I think, because, she worked under President Obama. She's kind of a known quantity. I think in that community, especially in elections and primary elections, there's a lot of respect for people who have sort of put in their dues in the party and things like that. And so I think it ended up being closer for a lot of those reasons. But I think
what's your take on the prospects for El-Sayed against the Republican election denier?
Well, so, I mean, Mike Rogers is a Republican, and I guess he's gone along to, because you can't not deny the election results and still have favor from Trump, right? I mean, I don't think Mike Rogers believes that Donald Trump won that election. Mike Rogers was kind of a moderate Republican who's kind of gone all Trumpy, and now apparently lives in Florida. Doesn't really actually live here. So he's like an old line Republican that was formerly in Congress, I think, and he ran for Senate last time and lost to Elizabeth Slotkin. So, I mean, I think what people are saying is that Republican establishment is seeing this as a gift to have Abdul El-Sayed be the nominee, because they are already seeing that they can paint him as, obviously he's Muslim. They can paint him as an extremist. At the same time, they're going to paint him as a jihadist and a communist, which doesn't really make any sense.
Communism is back if you're on the right.
But they're doing it anyway. They're being radical and scary. And so, of course, they're trying to show him as being frightening and scary. But the problem with that is that Abdul El-Sayed is actually a very compelling candidate. He's very charismatic. He's very good on his feet. Obviously, he's young. He's photogenic. He's really good with social media. He's kind of taken some of the, kind of Zoran Mamdani, playbook, I think, and he's all over social media. And so, I mean, candidates matter. That's like an old truism in politics, right? And so I think what people aren't seeing is that a lot of people don't even know who he is yet. So once people see more and hear more of him, I mean, I think it's going to be a close election. And just because it's a year where there's a lot of anti-establishment energy, I mean, I think he's going to be able to pull it out, but I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it's going to be very ugly. You'll keep us. He's kind of a special. I mean, the guy was like top in his class at Michigan. He's a PhD, MD. Yeah, he was a Rhodes Scholar, and he lifts so he's like built, and that's kind of become his trademark, is like the black t-shirt with a V-neck and all this stuff. And that could work against him or for him, I think, at the state level, because some people might think he's like too flashy. And, Michigan people like, kind of like, plain spoken. But he's also very, very Michigan. He's a sports guy. He was like a 3-sport athlete and stuff like this. So he can kind of speak a lot of different languages. I think it's a really interesting opportunity to see the test case of whether or not a true progressive can win at the state level if they actually get the opportunity to talk directly to people about issues like healthcare, like, economic opportunity and so on, and corruption and stuff like that. So.
Well, that's good. And I'm sure you'll keep us posted, because we'll have you back on before November. One of the things that I think you talked about way back, one of the times you were on Live from the Heartland, was Moby Dick and Herman Melville. And so you've been on the road for a number of reasons, which we'll get to. But how about talking about your travels from Minneapolis to Mystic in search of Moby Dick? What's that all about?
So, well, the Minneapolis part was I attended a conference in Minneapolis, which was a theater conference and theater and pedagogy of the oppressed. And I was bringing, so the Moby Dick quest actually started here in Michigan, working with men in prison. We were reading Moby Dick together as a novel and sort of doing, interpretations of different sections of Moby Dick, because it's a very big book. It's got a lot of small chapters. So we're kind of creating these dramatized exercise interpretations of different themes in Moby Dick that come out of these chapters. So I was kind of trying some of these out in Minneapolis, and it was a very, very hot weekend in Minneapolis. Sort of this theme of like, what's your white whale is the one that I used in leading these exercises, so everybody can sort of think about what it is that they're after in their life. What is their big sort of kind of mystical goal that you strive for, but also what's your kind of destructive obsession, because the white whale in the book is both of those things. And, Minneapolis was just like, I hadn't been there since, the ICE raids occurred. I haven't been in Minneapolis in a number of years. And this experience, they're still living with ICE, right? But the worst of it is kind of past, but this is still very much close to the surface everywhere in Minneapolis. And to me, the connection to Moby Dick has to do with sort of this tip over into fascism, where Moby Dick was written at a time when the United States was on the verge of civil war, right? And you had a country that was kind of headed towards destruction in a lot of ways. And so the fate of the boat of the Pequod in Moby Dick, which is like a microcosm of society. It's a democratic assemblage of people from all over the world. You know, you've got free African Americans. You've got people from the South Pacific, Africans, people from Europe, and you've got this crazy captain that's leading them on this destructive journey, right? Because he can't give up on this single-minded obsession. But you also have the vision of the narrator, Ishmael, who really wants to embrace all of the world. And for him, the whale represents something you can't ever fully get. You can't control nature. You can't control, you even can't even control like the dark side of yourself. You have to come to terms with the dark side of yourself. And so it kind of becomes this war between different visions of what America is or what democracy is. And I think it was really powerful for me after doing that to go and walk to the George Floyd Memorial and the Renee Good Memorial, which are within like a mile of each other in South Minneapolis, and see how people have built basically very democratically these living monuments to what has happened in Minneapolis and within like a mile of each other. And I think the spirit of the people showed in Minneapolis and are still showing there is, to me, very, central to what this country ought to be about, right? I mean, it showed us that, fascism, we have ascendant fascism, but fascism didn't win there because people showed up, and people showed up for their neighbors. You know what I mean? In a very, very powerful way. And that's like, I think it's galvanized that community into, that's part of who they are now at this point. So then I went from there. I traveled to Mystic, Connecticut to see my sister, but they also have this Moby Dick readathon there every year on the whaling boat in the Mystic Seaport Harbor, where people stay up all night and they read chapters from this book, from the 19th century. And I got to read a couple chapters there. And then I drove to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is where Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, at a farmhouse there. And they also were having a Moby Dick readathon. So I got to read another couple chapters in Pittsfield. So it became like a whole thing. And then I went to go to Nantucket on the ferry. And the next day I went to actually go see whales. So that kind of like.
Did you see whales?
Finally in New York, I went to Melville's grave and his plaque, that I think maybe you saw the picture of the plaque in New York. Because he lived his last 20 years in New York City, basically in obscurity, because Moby Dick was a failure as a novel, as most of his novels were. So nobody really knew who he was anymore the last 20 years of his life when he's living in New York.
When you were in Nantucket, did you actually see whales?
Not in Nantucket, no, because it's like a ferry that goes straight from New Bedford, and you go past Martha's Vineyard, and you go out there. And Nantucket is a little bit, I mean, it's a lot of rich people in Nantucket. I mean, the one thing I kept thinking about while walking around Nantucket was that if Melville was writing Moby Dick today, it wouldn't be about Nantucket. It would be about like soldiers in Ukraine or firefighters in Spokane or something like that. It would be about the immigrant people that are working in Nantucket, because everywhere I went in Nantucket, I saw landscapers like from, Latin America, and landscape trucks everywhere. You have fancy cars driving all over the place, and then half of the other vehicles are like pool maintenance vehicles, window cleaning vehicles, gardening trucks and stuff like that. So it's a weird place. It's nothing like the Nantucket, that Melville wrote about. Although apparently he didn't really even visit Nantucket until after he wrote Moby Dick. New Bedford, though, if you've ever been to New Bedford, is a really cool city that's still very like kind of gritty place, harbor town. And they have a great, fantastic whaling museum there. And I saw Bill Murray in New Bedford. He was trying to check into the same hotel as me, and they wouldn't let him in because he didn't have the right ID. And so he stormed out. He stormed out to try and find another hotel. I thought
that's pretty interesting. You should have let him share the room.
Fellow Chicagoan. I thought about it, but he didn't seem like that open to it. It would have been like Queequeg, like Ishmael Queequeg, me and Bill Murray sharing a bed in New Bedford.
So you didn't actually get to see any live whales, though.
But I did. No, I went on a whaling cruise out of Barnstable, which is in Cape Cod, and that went out past Provincetown, and that's where the Stellwagen Reserve is. And that's like a marine reserve where there's a lot of whales that feed there and breed there. And so we got to see, actually a lot of humpback whales.
Nice.
And some porpoise dolphins too, and some other things. But that was great. I'd never seen them that close before. And it's interesting.
Big.
I mean, they are big. Yeah. I mean, the humpbacks are not as big as the sperm whales. You know, that Moby Dick is about the hunt for sperm whales, but the humpbacks are a lot of fun. You know, they do the flips up with the tails and stuff like that, and the rolls and things. We didn't see any breaching whales, but that was kind of the end to that part of my journey, is to see the whales. Well, we did a lot to really destroy whales. I mean, that whole industry, all of American industry was built on this oil harvested from whales all over the world, and they were the leaders of it there in Nantucket. I mean, those whaling ships circumnavigated the entire planet, and they brought that whale back. It was used in factories. It was used to light lamps. They used parts of the whale to make corsets. I mean, so we really did a lot to try to wipe out whales, and the fact that it's an industry now to go and watch them is kind of interesting.
Let me, Paul Draus, before we move on to a couple other things on your travels, in your notes to me, you had thrown in something like whales as indigenous people. Can you give us a little hit on what that's about?
Well, so this actually is a thought that came to me when I was in Minneapolis, because at this theater conference, every day they had a line dancing session in the morning. And the guy leading the line dancing session was talking about how line dancing was something that was started by enslaved people, right? And there were all different kinds of ways of communicating that African enslaved people would communicate with each other through rhythm and non-verbally, right? Because they weren't allowed to do certain things or say certain things by the slavers and stuff. And it made me start thinking about how, in Moby Dick, there are these scenes with the whalers chasing the whales and how the whales are moving through the ocean. And if you start to think about, whales are intelligent social species, right? And so I started thinking about how, because there's so many interpretations of Moby Dick, and one that is that the book is really kind of about genocide, where, you have this obsessive quest to hunt these whales, and the whales are just trying to live, they're just trying to survive. And Melville himself has a lot of affinity for, his narrator has a lot of affinity for the colonized so-called savages and cannibals of the world. He says basically, I'll throw in my lot with the cannibals. I'm a call me king of the cannibals, and I'll resist all rulers. You know what I mean? And so I started feeling like this, thinking about like the commonalities between thinking about the world from an indigenous perspective and thinking about, well, how does the story look different from the point of view of the harpooners who are coming from, colonized places of the earth, and from the whales who are just trying to survive, this kind of capitalist onslaught on their existence.
Climate change.
Well, yeah,
driving the whales.
Now it continues in other ways, right? So now we're not killing whales for industry, but obviously they're threatened in a lot of other ways. But I guess Melville's bet in at the end of Moby Dick, of course, the whale wins. So
well, that's good. I haven't read it.
I guess the question is out there: who's going to win out if we continue on this quest to dominate everything, to ignore climate change? Are we going to win, or is nature going to win? I think if you follow Moby Dick, I think it's nature that's going to win if we continue on that quest.
Well, the basic contradiction is people or humankind versus nature. And nature has been really throwing some punches lately.
Yeah, they're going to win. The ocean will win,
Let me, we got a couple of more things I want to ask you about while we still have some time. I didn't talk to you about this, but I know that you went to a conference, Society for the Study of Social Problems.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit briefly before we go on to some sports? What was that conference all about?
Well, so Triple SP, as they call it, is like it used to be the insurgent sociologists, and they became Society for the Study of Social Problems, I think in the 50s or 60s. They were kind of like the more radical alternative to the American Sociological Association, which is sort of the more professional. ASA. It's ASA, but it could be ASA. Yeah. But so I go to that conference every year. It's a smaller conference, but it's a lot more collegial. And so a lot of people there are kind of, trying to figure out how does sociology survive, in this era when a lot of these kind of programs are under assault, like in places like Florida where, sociology is identified with, sort of wokeness, all these kind of things. And honestly, rightfully so. I mean, yeah, in my view, being woke is a good thing from a sociology standpoint. But the conference next year is going to be in Chicago. So
good, I'll go.
Hang on it. Yeah.
As a former sociologist.
Yeah. Maybe you could come down and we can set you up to do a radical sociology talk.
Well, we'll look forward to next year. Now I want to move on to the end of the show is like the back pages of the newspaper. So I need for you to talk. We have a couple of minutes, a little bit on your trip to Kansas and the World Cup, and then we'll go back to Michigan and to Windsor and talk about a bridge.
Yeah. So, I mean, my brother and I did like this has been a summer of like these kind of like spiritual quests, I guess. We drove together with my son from Chicago, actually from Michigan to Chicago, and then to Des Moines, and then to Kansas City. We had tickets to see Algeria play Austria, which wouldn't have seemed like a remarkable game, except for the fact that the Algerian team had been kind of adopted by the people of Kansas because their home base was in Lawrence, Kansas. And I mean, to me, it was actually probably
the most progressive place in Kansas.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was the heart of the Free Soilers during Bleeding Kansas, right? Was in Lawrence, and
It's also where Athletes United for Peace started too.
That makes sense. So there were a lot of people rooting for Algeria there in Kansas City, but in our row there were people that were rooting for Austria. There were people that were rooting for Algeria. We were rooting for Algeria, but it was actually a great kind of moment of sort of like, Athletes United for Peace and Brotherhood. Everybody it ended up being a great game. It was a kind of crazy back and forth game. It ended up as a 3-3 tie in like the last minute, I think, of extra time. And we were all just on our feet, and everybody afterwards was just like, I have a picture of, we had like my son and a guy from an Algerian guy, and then some people rooting for Austria all together. I mean, to me, it really, in spite of all the corruption and commercialization of that tournament, I think at its best, it really shows the best of what sport can be and how sport can bring people together, and to me, that was what I really took away from it. I was glad to be able to be a part of that, as much as I have my issues with the organization. And
yeah, we've talked a lot about the World Cup. I got to say, I really, I enjoyed watching. I watched more, soccer or football than I ever have in my life. Paul, we only have a couple minutes. Right near you, there's a new bridge, and we've talked about it briefly, but give me a real short thing on the Gordie Howe Bridge.
Yeah, so Gordie Howe Bridge, named after, again, an athlete, a great Canadian-born hockey player that also played many years for the Detroit Red Wings. So it was kind of seen as appropriate to name this bridge connecting the U.S. and Canada after Gordie Howe. I think the really important thing about it is this represents a bridge that's publicly owned and not owned by a private owner. The existing bridge in Detroit is called the Ambassador Bridge. It's actually owned by one family, the Maroon family. And so for many years, the governors, Republican and Democratic governors have wanted an alternative to having this one privately owned bridge connecting U.S. and Canada. So this was a deal that was made under Republican governor. Yeah, Canada paid for the bridge, but we'll get paid back through the tolls on the bridge. It's really a tremendous engineering accomplishment. The impacts on communities, are yet to be known because it just opened 2 weeks ago. But it's a huge infrastructure, addition here, and I think it has potential to really transform a lot of things. Of course, the Trump administration has gotten involved and tried to shut it down a couple different times, and of course, all the tension between the U.S. and Canada raises questions about, U.S.-Canadian trade, which this is the biggest, this is, I think, the busiest international border in one of the busiest in the world, right? And it's a huge amount of international commerce passes through here. So it's a big, huge deal. We don't know what the full impact will be and how much politics will affect it. But I mean, I think people were pretty excited about it. And Gordie Howe, of course, a unifying figure between
Paul Draus, I want to thank you.